namaste, welcome to this segment on Pranayama for the Doshas. So you may have worked with Pranayama in the past, but when we look from Pranayama from an Ayurveda lens, there's a few things that you need to be able to understand to work with Pranayama as medicine for the Doshas, to be able to weave it into your Ayurveda practice, whether you practice asana or not. So the first thing to really understand from the Ayurvedic perspective is the root of all disease, is understood to be stagnant prana. Prana is life force energy, that ideally is flowing throughout the body. When it stops flowing, this causes a lot of problems. So essentially when we have something that in our body blocks the flow of prana, from a flow coming this way, we now have an issue of stagnancy here and a deficiency here. And so this is really what causes all that we know within Ayurveda as dis-ease. And that same blockage, the stagnancy of life force here, the buildup of it here, is what's going to cause issues throughout the body, whatever dosha may be involved. So with that in mind, when we work with prana, and we work with pranayama in particular, we want to be able to understand how to fill every single cell in the body with vibrant prana, with very fresh life force. The second thing to keep in mind that we are working with is this concept of agni. Agni is our body's processing power. It means fire in Sanskrit. And so when we work with our body's agni, this is what actually allows us to dissolve those blockages so that prana can then flow freely. Oftentimes those blockages are considered to be something called ama. Ama is this unprocessed material. It's often first looked at as unprocessed food. So say you eat hamburger and fries, and then you drink a huge milkshake. When you eat this, and maybe it's very late at night, maybe you didn't even have an appetite, but you were just eating out because you were eating with friends, your agni was not strong. And this is a very big, thick, heavy, processed meal that your body then has to process. So with that in mind, if you're not able to fully digest it, something is left over. And that something that's left over is considered to be ama. When we look at beyond just the sense of food, when we go into the energetic sense, what are those energies, sometimes even in a yoga practice, that maybe you haven't fully processed because you haven't fully breathed? So sometimes when we're in a yoga practice and we feel an opening throughout our neck, for example, as we release right ear towards right shoulder, if I just leave it there without breathing, it can't move. And it is actually that breathing that allows for our circulation, not only of blood, but on a deeper energetic level, also of prana, to then flow into that space, wash the space, and flow out anything that is not yet processed. When we look at this from the mental level, this is also true. So there are many experiences that we do not process necessarily unless we sit down to meditate. When we're in that process of needing to think through things, needing to process things that go on in the mind, this is where prana once again comes in handy. We need that prana flowing in and out and through our whole system, because the mind lives in the whole system, not just up here. And so when prana is blocked anywhere in the body, the mind itself then also becomes blocked. We can't process things the same way. This is also true of our emotions. So whether it be an emotional trauma or even the emotions that come from those traumas getting triggered. So it may be sadness, it may be anger, it may be so much joy and excitement that even then you kind of burn yourself out if you don't actually then process and integrate that into your being. So this is what is helping us, this understanding of prana, of agni, to then process ama. And as we process ama, we then move it back into circulation, back into the digestive tract, to then have our agni deal with it. Once the agni has dealt with it, once it has processed it, then prana can freely flow once again. And this, from the Ayurvedic perspective, is how we prevent disease. So you can clearly see from this perspective, pranayama, being able to work with the breath, becomes very important. We also then want to understand on a deeper level, so then every individual is unique, and every individual has a certain doshic pattern that overlays their entire system. When we look at this at the level of breath, this becomes very specific. So we can consider that each dosha actually has its own type of breathing pattern. And this type of breathing pattern actually affects the agni of each dosha. When we look at vata dosha, for example, the agni is considered to be variable. So this means when we look at this at the level of the appetite, that sometimes you have a very strong appetite, and sometimes you have no appetite at all. In general, that basically means it's weak, and then sometimes it can be very high. So vata, because it's wind, because it's irregular, when you think of wind blowing onto a flame, if there's fuel, it will actually make the flame go bigger. And if there's no fuel, it will actually blow it out. So this is what happens with vata dosha. It can be very high, it can be very low. So it's considered to be variable, something known as vishama agni. Because of this is why vata tends towards deficiency. So it has energy, it has fuel. The agni gets revved up and burns it all away because the agni has gotten so big. Or, since it burns away all of the fuel, then the agni is very low. So this is sort of vata's problem, and this is precisely how vata moves into deficiency, which is really its disease pattern. With vata dosha, the breathing pattern that we look for is someone who struggles to actually take a full inhale. And this may also be because of vata's deficiency. Through vata's deficiency, there can be a muscle tone deficiency. And if there is a muscle tone deficiency anywhere in the body, it is everywhere in the body. And if it is everywhere in the body, it is also in the diaphragm. So this means that if the muscle tone is low, the diaphragm is not firing as it should. And so you will have a very weak, shallow inhale. If you have a shallow inhale, you are not pulling in as much prana. This leads to further deficiency. In this way, all of the doshas are disease patterns, and like attracts like. So just as vata already was burning itself out, was moving into deficient territory, it then also does not bring in enough prana to actually balance that out. So this is something you want to look for. Someone who is not fully inhaling. Someone who is almost moving too quickly to be able to actually take a breath for themselves. When we then look at Pitta Dosha, when we look at its agni is very hot. It is the element of fire. And so if you've ever seen, you have a candle and then you have a lighter. If you were to put the lighter to the candle, the flame gets actually bigger. If you add fire to fire, you make more flame. This is what happens with Pitta Dosha's agni. And so when we look at the level of the appetite, Pitta Dosha's agni is generally very high, very strong. So most of the day it may be stable. And just as soon as that fuel starts to run out, then it gets even stronger because the fire is burning even bigger. This is Pitta Dosha's issue that can either lead to burnout or lead to increased tension, into increased pressure and buildup. And as well, that increased fire creates more ash. And that ash, if it is not removed efficiently from the body, is also ama. And so in that way, it also creates blockages. It's understood in Ayurveda that it is those blockages from the toxins, from every cellular reaction in the body that have not yet been moved out, that actually build up in cells, that build up in our tissue, and then prevent prana from flowing. So this is actually where we start to feel tension and tightness. It is because of that heat, that constriction because prana is not flowing, because there is something taking up the space, and the something taking up the space is that ash left over from Pitta Dosha's agni. In order to work with Pitta Dosha, then, we look for the breath. And so generally when you see someone who is breathing with Pitta Dosha pattern, they have a very short exhale, or at least it is short compared to the inhale. So it may look something like this. Just by observing that, if you're familiar with pranayama techniques like Kapalabhati or Bastrika, it actually looks similar to that, just maybe much more relaxed. This can also be part of the tendency because Pitta Dosha tends to be very strong, actually. And because it is very strong, muscle tone tends to be strong. And with strong muscle tone comes a strong and active diaphragm. because as well, the body of a Pitta person tends to be athletic, they tend to go into plenty of athletic activities, which over their lifetime creates a strong and active diaphragm, able to pull in plenty of breath. But the issue here becomes very short exhales. The short exhale leads to increased heat, and increased heat revs up the agni. So this is something to keep in mind for Pitta Dosha. When it comes to Kapha Dosha also tends to be actually a very strong dosha. But the issue with Kapha is it's slow, it's damp, it's stagnant. And when we look at the level of the lungs actually being the storehouse of mucus in the body. For Kapha Dosha, mucus and Kapha have very similar qualities. They're both damp, heavy, and cold. And so if you think about Kapha, generally, the agni is generally lowered, is equally in the stomach, actually because there's too much mucus. So if you think of once you've eaten a very heavy meal, maybe say ice cream, late at night, what's happening in the body? You have an extra coating of this thick, sort of gooey substance, which your body then basically has all of the building blocks to create more mucus. It's understood in Ayurveda that that mucus that is needed to protect the stomach lining from acid, from hydrochloric acid, this is actually kledaka kapha. This is type of kapha in the body that protects you. If you remember, kapha is the energy that protects, that lubricates. What happens is now with this extra building blocks from our food, we then generate too much. So because we have this extra dense nutrition, but we have maybe not expended the energy, as is common for Kapha Dosha, who is maybe sometimes a little more sedentary, you have this leftover energy, which is the building block of mucus. The mucus then is generated in the stomach, and it's considered that the lungs are the storehouse. So when you have lungs that become then the storehouse for mucus, for excess fluid, it becomes then difficult for even a deep breath to fill you up with prana. You have something blocking its path. This is the issue for Kapha Dosha. Actually getting warmed up enough to move some of that mucus out. When we look at the lungs, it's a very interesting organ because it is mostly actually filled with fluid. And because it is an empty space in the middle of your body, where circulation is constantly passing through, it will fill up with fluid unless it is circulated out. So this, even when we look at the current disease that is plaguing our planet, it becomes difficult for people to breathe and they end up with pneumonia because actually the circulation to the lungs gets cut off. And so it becomes an abnormal sense of pneumonia where people cannot actually breathe, people cannot take in prana and life force because it is getting blocked, because circulation to the lungs itself is getting blocked. So for Kapha, we want to actually be able to boost the agni, to lift it up, because when we put water onto a fire, the log that is its fuel becomes damp. And with that dampness, the flame gets much lower and may even go out. So we need to rev that agni up. We need to get it up. We need to get it hot. We need to get circulation going to the lungs so that it actually can pump that mucus out, expectorate it, get it out of the nasal cavities, get it out of the mouth, get it out of the lungs. And then later, it will also ideally come out of the stomach. This is how you work with Kapha Dosha. So now when we look at, I guess I would consider first to mention Kapha Dosha's breathing pattern. You may notice someone with excess mucus, for example, wheezing. You will not always see this. Even if someone has excess mucus, you need to be very attentive to any excess coughs, any wheezing, any shortness of breath, but that may actually be caused by excess. Not because of a weak muscle, but because of excess nutrition, excess of this mucus in the lungs, and maybe a deficiency of circulation because of sedentary lifestyle, because of lack of activity. So then when we actually look at how do we work then with hot and cold, how do we heat up the breath, how do we cool down with the breath, we are looking at what is called in Ayurveda the virya. So virya is considered to be an energetic. And this energetic is something we look at with food. It's something we look at with herbs. So when you look at ginger, for example, ginger is considered to have a heating virya because it's going to heat you up, boost circulation, boost blood flow into your stomach, and all of this is going to heat you up. So it's energetic is heating. When you look at an herb like neem, for example, it is a very bitter herb that is actually going to flush your tissues. It's going to lower your digestive fire as it flushes these tissues. If you think about your stomach building up acid, building up enzymes to then be able to digest, if you have this very bitter herb that your body in a way interprets almost as poison, it will flush everything out of your stomach. And as it does that flushing, you are deficient of this acid that will actually help you digest food. And so in that way, it lowers your agni. It's going to then lower your body temperature because it is sort of flushing things out. It is flushing out nutrition, which is actually what your cells use to fuel your flame. And so when we look then at the energetic of breath, we understand there are warming breaths, there are cooling breaths, and there are neutral breaths. When we look at warming or hot forms of breathing, this would be considered fast exhales, powerful exhales. So, as I mentioned with Pitta Dosha, this could look as simple as and then when we move into pranayama, we actually move into understanding that this involves breath techniques like Kapalabhati or Bastrika, which you may have also worked with. It is also important to consider when we look at heating and cooling virya that the right nostril is connected to the right side of the body. This is called Surya Nadi. Surya Nadi enters, the prana enters in through this nostril, the right nostril, and runs through the entire right side of the body. It's considered that if more air is entering the right nostril, more air is also entering into the right side of the lungs. It's stimulating the nerves on the right side of your body more. And with this is the stimulation of your Surya Nadi, which is the energy channel related to sun energy. Sun energy is emissive. It is heating, just like the sun. It is generous, it is giving, it is expanding. And so this is what's happening on the right side of the body. And so we even then consider that Chandrabedana, which is actually closing off the left nostril, breathing through the right nostril. This would be also considered heating because it is stimulating the sun channel of our body, the right nostril. When we then look at the left side of the body, this is considered Chandra Nadi. The entire Chandra Nadi connects left nostril to left side of diaphragm, left side of chest and lungs, left side of body, which is considered to be the lunar side, the Chandra side. The lunar side of your body is considered to be receptive. And in being receptive, it is also magnetic. So while you have this electric quality on the right, you have a magnetic quality similar to the Earth and the Moon and how they actually hold each other in connection. This is this magnetic quality of receptivity. And this same receptivity is cooling in nature because it is not expanding energy. It is actually drawing energy to it. And so when we look at cooling breaths, we look at techniques like shitali or shitkari. Shitali is this is considered to be cooling. As well, Chandrabedana, which is breathing only through the left nostril by closing off the right. This is considered to be cooling because it interacts with this side of the body. As well, taking a longer exhale, so the opposite of what we discussed with Pitta, is also considered to be cooling. It's relieving of stress, relieving of tension. It helps our fire. Actually, as we inhale, we accumulate air in this warm inner space inside of your chest. The air inside of you catches and draws heat. And so the longer it is there, it draws in more heat. And the longer you exhale, the more it can move all of that heat energy out. And so any of the breath techniques that would also use a very long exhale, say a longer exhale count, would also be considered cooling. When we look at techniques that are considered neutral, this would include alternate nostril breathing, so involving both nostrils together. It would also involve Shivananda breath, so actually inhaling, holding the breath as long as you can, and then exhaling as slow as you can. Because we are going to create more space for the inhale, more space for the exhale, and more space for the hold, in this way we're actually creating some neutrality in the body. And we're expanding for all doshas the ability to take a deep breath and pull in more prana. We then also look at Brahmari, for example, the buzzing breath. Or even certain mantra techniques, like chanting Om, to be all of this something that has a neutral effect on the body, because we are inhaling, increasing our prana, and we're actually doing something a little different with this breath. For example, with Brahmari, we're actually using it to activate the chakras. Ideally, when we are sending the energy up, such as having the tongue on the tip of just behind the teeth, we are sending the energy up to our crown chakra, or into third eye. As you even decrease the tone of Brahmari, you can pull it down through the chakras. So while my crown, to buzz my crown up, may sound like to send my breath into the heart, it may sound something more like And so in this way, Brahmari specifically, we can actually use to send the vibration to different areas in the body. And in sending the vibration, we are actually expanding the ability of prana to move in that space. When you are feeling increased vibration there, it is truly because you are sending prana through your exhale into that area. You're sending your awareness into that area as you place a hand there. And so this helps prana move into that space. And so it can be beneficial for any dosha. We can also understand any technique, for example, box breathing or strategic breath, where you're inhaling for 4, holding for 4, exhaling 4, holding, exhale for 4. This pattern of breathing is also considered to be neutral and will not necessarily increase or decrease the energetic, the virya, of heating or cooling that will then affect the agni. So now let's talk about what do we do for the doshas then? So when we look at working with Pitta Dosha, we want to tap in to those cooling breaths. So you want to work with shitali, shitkari. You want to have slow, luxurious exhales. You want to be able to relax tension down wherever you may find it in the body using your breath. You can also work with neutral breaths, as this will help pull in more prana. You can also work with left nostril breathing. All of this will help cool down and reduce the tension while still pulling in more prana for Pitta Dosha. When it comes to Kapha Dosha, we want to heat it up. So this is where we look at the heating breaths, like Surya Nadi, inhaling right nostril, exhaling right nostril. We look at working with Kapalabhati, short, sharp exhales. And when we look at Bhastrika, Bhastrika involves a strong inhale and a strong exhale. This is known as bellows breath. And so this helps you pull in and out the diaphragm, strengthen and tone that muscle. But we don't use this particular heating breath with Vata dosha because it actually may be too heating and too drying to Vata system. Because of all of the energy and circulation, it may move out of the lungs. All of the moisture you are pushing out of the lungs, which then for Kapha dosha becomes very medicinal. You can also work with the neutral breaths for Kapha dosha to actually balance it out. When it comes to Vata dosha, because Vata dosha is variable, there are several things that you can do to work with it. When you look at wanting to strengthen the diaphragm, this is where Kapalabhati comes in. So using Kapalabhati, the short, sharp exhales, can actually help strengthen and tonify the diaphragmatic muscle and its actions to then help Vata take that full breath. It is also warming, which is good for Vata's cool nature, but it is not so drying as Vastrika. We also then want to consider what time of day are we working with. And so in the morning, for example, Vata dosha will want to warm up. And so in the morning we would use right nostril breathing. Or in the evening we would use left nostril breathing. Because in the evening, because it's variable, throughout the day, in the morning you've been sleeping. And so Vata dosha, generally the energy is low. And so the agni is not high. We want to lift the agni up with warming breaths in the morning. After a long day of burning energy, we then want to also in the afternoon, the evening, bring it down. So if you are working with Vata dosha and bringing it down in the evening, you'll actually want to use some cooling breaths. But you don't want to necessarily go so cold as Shitali or Shitkari. So this is where you would use things like a long exhale. To let go of all the thoughts and stress, nervousness from the day. To slow down. And as well, working with left nostril breathing. Alternate nostril breathing is considered to be the ideal practice for Vata dosha because it will help balance the flow of energy in Surya Nadi and Chandra Nadi. And so this helps it actually come back into balance. Just as it is considered to be variable, and its agni is variable, you actually want to be able to balance its energetic. And so alternate nostril breathing helps you get most into balancing its energetic more than any other breath. Then when you work with other techniques like Shivananda breath or like Brahmari, these techniques actually very much help Vata build a greater awareness of the breath, of where can we send the breath, and helps shake up the vibration of any stuckness that may also occur with Vata. But because it's dry, because it's deficient, because there has been some blockage that we can't process, that then creates the deficiency. So, I will also be creating a video to come after this with sequences for Vata in the morning, Vata in the afternoon or evening, then Kapha, and then also Pitta Dosha. There will be 10-minute sequences, so tune in to practice with me. There will also be demos of some of these practices in case you are not familiar. So the videos will be a bit over 10 minutes, but once you already know the techniques and you've practiced with me, I recommend you use these 10-minute techniques to incorporate pranayama into your life so that you can begin to work with your own prana to bring greater balance, greater harmony, greater healing, and greater liberation for the prana moving through you and into your dharma through you. So, tune in for those videos, and as well, tune in for the other dosha videos, beyond just your own, so you can learn what are other people doing, and how might I as a teacher help them. Thank you so much.